So my name is Paul. I'm very happy that you could join us here tonight or this morning or wherever you are. Let me just get the presentation onto the screen now, please. Let's see. There it is. So I'm one of the many volunteers at the Nordic Bible Museum, popularly called NOBIMU. Personally, I've been collecting Bibles since 1984. So, and books about the Bible and the history of the Bible and transmission of the Bible. But I'm self-taught in this. And the topic that we're going to cover tonight is very comprehensive. And actually, just one of the points could be the item for a whole talk in itself. And some actually already have been talks at the museum already. But if it can whet your appetite a little bit, that you want to learn more about this, to study this personally, then I'm very happy with the result of this talk. Let's just take a few words about the Nordic Bible Museum. So it's located in downtown Oslo in very modern, open exhibition rooms. It's not very old. It's 2 years old. It was opened officially on May 31st, 2018 by a representative of the Norwegian authorities. The purpose of this museum, which is unique in the Nordic countries, therefore it's also a Nordic Bible Museum, not just a Norwegian Bible Museum, is to make the Bible's history and content available and known. Even though the word Bible is in the name, it doesn't mean that it's a religious place. It's actually non-denominational, neutral as it comes to theology or religion. It's more like a book museum that focuses on the Bible and the history of the Bible. So among our volunteers and visitors, we have people from all corners, people who are religious and people who are not, from different religious organizations also. It's not only unique in the Nordic countries, it's also actually the largest of its kind in Europe. And it's based on the largest private Bible collection in the Nordic countries and probably also in all of Europe. And as I said, it's run by volunteers only. We have no paid staff, and it's privately funded. We receive no support from the authorities financially. So let's go back to the topic. From tablet to tablet, the evolution of the book in the light of the book of books, the Bible. As I said, it's a very comprehensive subject that we have chosen here tonight. The idea came from this cartoon that many of you probably have already seen, and that Moses was the first person with a tablet downloading data from the cloud. That gave the idea to not only the title of this talk, but also the topic as such. There is a tremendous amount of sources on this topic, thousands of books and articles actually. I picked out just a few here in English that I've used for this talk. And if I'm going to recommend especially just one, I would take Christopher de Hamel's book, the book A History of the Bible. It might be sold out in hardback now, but it's, I believe, still available as a softcover, and you will still be able to get it secondhand as a hardback anyway. Excellent, beautiful book. So we use the word book now several times. What is actually a book, and why is it called a book? Well, according to most definitions that you find in encyclopedias, etc., a book is a written or printed work consisting of pages glued or sewn together along one side and bound in covers. And the word book comes from the Old English book, which comes from a Germanic book. In German, you say Buch, and which is then actually beech. So it comes from a beechwood tablets. In Norwegian, we say bøk, which is also very similar to book, right? So the topic tonight actually goes a little bit outside of the definition of a book that's used here, which is more just like the book as we know it today, because we are starting with the stone tablet and we're ending with the e-tablet. And none of those are actually books according to this definition, but in a bigger, wider sense, they are also so important to understanding the history of the book anyway. This illustration here is from the largest Norwegian encyclopedia under the subject book there. And I was very happy to see what kind of book they used as an illustration for this article, because it's not just any book. It's not only the book of books, the Bible, it's actually the King James Bible that they used, the most printed book of all of history, as we'll be returning to a little bit later. So why the Bible? Why is the Bible the book of books? Why is it called the book of books? Well, it's older than any other books that are used today. It's dependent on the different writings. It's from 2,000 to 3,500 years old. And it's actually a library collection of books. It's 66 books altogether. And as the Guinness Book of World Records bring out in its illustration, it's definitely the most copied, printed book of all of history. Nobody knows how many copies, but it's at least 5 billion and well above that as well. It's currently translated into approximately 700 languages, all of the Bible. And then in addition, only the New Testament, another 1,600 different languages. And then in addition, other separate books, 1,138 languages. But these figures rise all the time because new languages are added to monthly. The Bible is also a book that can be used for anything, actually, for reading, for studying, for preaching, for teaching, for research. And it's almost an endless amount of different formats you can get the Bible in. You can get in a super folder, which is a super large format. You can get it in miniature format, like we have at the museum. We have the whole Bible, just in a couple of centimeters tall miniature books. And we even also have on display a waterproof copy, and you get so many other different versions. And last but not least, it's the holy book for 3 major and several minor world religions. So the author, John Mann, has written a couple of books on Gutenberg and the media revolution. And he lists 4 revolutions or inventions in communication. Writing that came on the stage about 5,000 years ago. the alphabet about 3,500 years ago. The Codex, which is similar to what we would call the book today, about 1,800 years ago, and then the printing nearly 500 years ago, and then digital in the 20th century. I said he lists 4 inventions because he includes writing, alphabet, and then printing and the digital. But having researched for this talk and also presented it a couple of times in Norwegian, I found that the Codex is so important to the development of the book as a means of communication that we also need to include that here. So that's what we'll be looking at later on. We're going to cover writing the alphabet quite quickly because the origin of writing in the alphabet is clouded in a lot of mystery. Actually, there are many different theories about where and when and how they came onto the stage. So we will, as I said, cover it quite briefly. Now, writing is the process of using symbols to communicate thoughts and ideas in a readable form. And without writing, of course, there will be nothing to read. That's for sure. We could look at illustrations maybe, but there wouldn't be anything to read. And it's believed that it originated in several cultures, and the most important writing systems are cuneiform, used by the Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, and then the hieroglyphs used by the Egyptians, and then the ancient script that's found in Central America. It's how the transition from pictorial writing, writing with images, has taken place is not known actually. And the oldest history of the letter writing is very controversial. But some scholars believe that the oldest known letter script is found in the Sinai inscriptions, and that these were developed from Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the writing in these inscriptions is said to have given rise to the various Semitic alphabets. So as I said, there are different opinions as to this, but I think it's very interesting that it is actually, it's believed to have taken place in the area where the Bible also originates from. So just have to move this little box that's a little bit in my way here. Second invention is the alphabet. An alphabet, that is the set of symbols or characters that reproduce the sounds of a language. As we already mentioned, the early development of this is uncertain. The oldest known pure alphabetic system is the North Semitic alphabet, which originated in the Syrian-Palestinian area in about 1700 to 1500 BCE. And from this North Semitic alphabet, 4 main branches of the alphabet developed around 1000 BCE in the Mediterranean area. That's the Canaanite, the Aramaic, the South Semitic, and the Greek. And most alphabets in the world have evolved from these 4. It's many theories about why the alphabet was invented and by whom. Some believe it was businessmen, actually, Canaanite businessmen, who were dealing with many different countries, peoples, and they needed something simple to jot down quickly. So they made a system where one sound would be represented by one symbol. So you get then this alphabet, the Semitic alphabet, with 22 characters. Don't know what to do with this box, that's my way. So it 22 characters, all consonants, no vowels. You could just think about it. If the Bible had been written with intricate writing systems such as the hieroglyphs or the cuneiform from Babylonia, which could only be mastered after years of study, and which actually very few relatively could read at the time, and very few people would have had the opportunity to read the Bible. But an alphabet with only 22 characters was so easy to learn that most people can master it in a short time. So when we now look at one of the very early uses of this alphabet, the stone tablets, actually, that Moses used to write the 10 Commandments on, or was used actually by God's finger to write the 10 Commandments. It's interesting to think about this with the size. These are exhibited at the museum. I have one of the copies with me here. You can see it. It's not big. It's about 15 centimeters tall. And that is a little bit surprising, isn't it? Because when you're used to probably seeing illustrations of Moses coming down from the mountain, hauling two big tombstones, one under each arm, this old man down from the mountain. So we'd expect something much bigger. But actually, there wasn't a need for anything bigger. The writing here, by the way, is authentic. It's what it could have looked like, at least. It's the Paleo-Hebrew or Phoenician writing. It's written with, as I said, only consonants and no vowels. So it takes less space than in English or in Norwegian, where we have both consonants and vowels. So it takes less space in that sense. And in addition, you can add that Hebrew was and is a very compact, precise language. So that normally, when you translate from Hebrew into English or Norwegian, you would use a lot more words and letters to translate into those languages than you will find in the original Hebrew text. So again, think about it. What if it was hieroglyphs on this? Moses, he was trained in Egypt. He got the highest education that Egypt could provide. But he could have written this with hieroglyphs. But again, how many would be able to read it then? So it's very interesting that the alphabet with the 22 consonants, the 22 letters, came onto the scene just in time for this to be used in connection with the Bible. It's actually a quite funny cartoon in connection with the size of these tablets, where Moses might have thought like this, that he couldn't wait for this to come out in a paperback edition. Now, the tablets, the stone tablets, that was okay for the 10 Commandments. There's not that much text. But what about the whole Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses? That is a very comprehensive document. Then you need something else, and then so it was written on a scroll, on scrolls rather, letter scrolls. And it's very interesting that there are no other books that I'm aware of, at least, that are so old to use the alphabet that are still extinct today. One famous example of a biblical scroll is the Great Isaiah Scroll that we can see if we go to Jerusalem and the Jerusalem Museum and the Book of the Shrine, part of that museum. The Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, are found just after the Second World War, from 1947 on. And this scroll, as it is the condition it is today, it's 7.5 meters, 7.3 meters long. So imagine Jesus reading from the scroll of Isaiah, as the Bible said he did, the Gospels say he did, when he visited his hometown and home synagogue of Nazareth. And the quotation that he made from Isaiah is towards the end of the book or the scroll. There was no chapter numbers at that time. There was no verse numbers. There were no division between words and you're reading from right to left. So Jesus must have been very well known in the scriptures to be able to find this quote so quickly. And you can just imagine with all these people, all these old friends and family sitting there in expectation, waiting for him to read it. Now, the scrolls were very good for lasting text. But what about notes, like the quick notes that we need to jot down in everyday life? People would use what we call ostraka today, or rather pot sheds, bits and pieces of broken pots and so to make notes on. But you might say that that is not very satisfactory from a professional point of view. So very early on, actually, much earlier than we believed before, writing tablets came on the scene. Outside Turkey, just a few years ago, they discovered a ship that was 3,300 years old, that had been preserved in the mud, so there was no oxygen to break it down the materials. And inside the ship, they actually found a writing tablet. And this was much, much older than what they have believed before, the age of the writing tablets. And if you look at this here, you see it's like a frame. Inside that frame, they would have a wax. And then you can see it's like centerpiece there, so you could fold it. And then they would have a stylus to write in the wax. So for instance, a merchant, like for instance, the captain on this ship, when they were loading cargo, he can make it to make calculations and notes. And then when it was finished, he could just erase the wax. The Romans, they took this writing tablet and they developed it further by adding more pages, more boards, so you could flip it. And it's actually and they call it the codex. And codex is from the trunk of a tree, the word for a trunk of a tree, the codex. And it's actually believed that Caesar used such a codex to write his famous book on the wars, his wars in Gallia on it. Now, from this, if you take and if you combine these writing tablets with more and more pages that you could, or boards that you could flip, and combine that with the material papyrus, which is from the papyrus plant. We have an article on the papyrus at the museum's website, so you can go there if you want more information about it. If you add these two together, you get the codex. That is square pages of papyrus bound together that you could flip. What we call a book, basically, today. And this development of the codex is actually directly aligned to the growth of Christendom, the early Christians. Because if we take a look at the chart here with that shows the different forms of material in the first 4 centuries, we see that in the 1st century, what we have found of these materials is 77.5% in a scroll format. So documents, we have found 75.5% are in a scroll format, whereas in the codex format, it's only 1.5%. Now, if we go now to the 4th century, we see almost an opposite. We see now that the scroll is down to 15.2%, while the codex is up to 56.3%. And this is directly aligned to the growth of the early Christians, and also into the growth of another material different from papyrus, and that is parchment, leather. So the early Christians are believed to have been the first to pick up the codex format and to put it into use. The Romans continued to use scroll format for their literary texts, the poets, etc., all the way into actually the 8th century. But the Christians, right from the start, started to use the codex format. And why would they do that? Because it was more practical. Because the early Christians were concerned with preaching and teaching from the Holy Scriptures. And then they needed something that made it quick for them to find a certain passage in discussion, in preaching, or in teaching. We will see an example of this very shortly. So we can actually go to that example right away. And that is an example of a famous papyri codex, the Papyrus 46 or P46 from the 2nd century CE. We have a facsimile edition of that on exhibition at the museum. You can find it, most of it today you can find in Dublin, in the Chester Bay Museum there. It's right in the downtown Dublin in the tourist area. It's a very nice museum, and it's free access, and you don't have to line up for it either. There's also a part of it in Michigan, in the United States. So if you would have the letters of Paul in a scroll format, that scroll would actually be 20 meters long. So virtually, I mean, impossible to find a certain passage before the one you would talk to or wanted to show this to had left long ago. So we can understand why the Christians saw the practical possibilities that the Codex invention gave to them. I said that that papyrus was also replaced by parchment during these first 4 centuries. And that is because parchment was widely available. Animals you would have everywhere, whereas the papyrus you would get from Egypt. Parchment is much more flexible. Papyrus breaks more easily. In parchment, you can write on both sides, whereas in papyrus, you could only write on one side. On parchment, you can erase if you wrote something wrong. On papyrus, you can't do that. Parchment is much smoother surface. It makes for smoother writing and much more detailed, beautiful illustrations. And it is probably more durable than papyrus. You would think that it was cheap, that papyrus was cheaper though, but we really don't know that because we have no data about prices on these things 2,000 years ago. The one advantage that the papyrus had over the parchment was that papyrus was much easier to extend to add to. Let's go now to one famous parchment codex, and that's the Codex Sinaiticus. We had special talks on these great codexes some time back in connection with the special exhibition we had on that. And these are marvelous books. The Codex Sinaiticus, the great, well, 95% of it today you can see you'll find in the British Library in London. And the British Library has 1.6 billion items. And a spokesman from the museum says on the internet that the Codex Sinaiticus is probably the most treasured item among these 1.6 billion items. It's a beautiful big book, 4 columns, wide pages. And the parchment is so thin that it's unbelievable in parchment. It's so well maintained. It's from about the year 350, so it's really an old book. You know how many animals it would take to make a Bible like this? About 200 animals, quite a big flock, and which made them also very expensive even at that time. You see, in this codex, you will find no illustrations, and that was common at the time. But during the Middle Ages, book illustration of Bibles was really developed into a true art. Now, the reasons why they did this was to glorify the text. It was holy, but also as teaching tools. This one here, there's the Lindefarn Gospels in Latin you will find in the British Library. This one here you can go to Ireland to see. It's a national treasure of Ireland. You find that in Dublin as well at the Chester Beatty Museum. But for this one you have to line up for half an hour, and you have to pay money to see. Whereas at the Chester Beatty it's free and there's no line. In these islands, England and Ireland, a certain script developed, and it's called Insular Script, from insula in Latin, meaning island. When they were working on these Bibles, they developed a special form of the Latin alphabet. And that the most important aspect of that for us now is with word division, that they introduced word divisions into the text. And as we know, text with word division is much easier to read than text that has no word divisions at all. So the effect of this was that the Bible became easier to read. Actually, the Romans had, on purpose, actually departed away from word division because it made reading more difficult, so that it would be more exclusive, so that a few people could read, actually. So they did this on purpose, made it difficult for people to read. The next step in making it easier to read the text of a book or a Bible came during the reign of the great Frankian king Charlemagne, Charles the Great, from about the year 800. Because until that time, you would have text with only capital letters. And that is not so easy to read if you look at a big chunk of text, is it? But they introduced lowercase texts, and that made it much easier to read. At this time, they also developed further illustrations of books and the Bible. And that was very important because the great majority of people were illiterate. And would you believe it, that even this great king, Charlemagne, Emperor Charlemagne, he was also illiterate. He tried and tried and tried to learn to read and write, but he never mastered it. So then we can understand the importance of illustrations to teach. And we can see this also in these old churches, Gothic cathedrals, and the glass windows and so on, full of biblical illustrations to teach people sitting there and during the sermons, etc. Now, these books and the Bibles in the Middle Ages became more and more luxurious and more expensive. And when we think about how many professions it took to make such a Bible, we understand indeed why they became expensive. Because there was 5 professions involved. First, it was the parchment maker who made the parchment. That was a long and process that required special skills. Then you had the copyist who was copying the text. You have different levels of copyists. The lowest level, they could not even read themselves, so they could not read the text that they copied. But the more advanced copyists, of course, could that. Then you would have the rubricator, who was kind of setting the page, kind of organizing the page. And then you would have the miniature painter, who was not just making the miniature like it sounds like from the name, but he was making all the illustrations on the page. And then lastly, you would have the bookbinder, which was also very specialized profession. So they became very expensive, these Bibles. And that brings us to a new, very important step in the development of the book and the Bible. And that was what happened at about the year 1250 in the area of Paris in France. And that's why these Bibles are called Paris Bibles. And it's the first mass production of books and Bibles that we find. Because of the growth of cities, you also got the first universities. And with universities, you had teachers and you had students who needed the books for study and to bring with them. And they couldn't be so big and expensive for them to be able to have them and to use them. At the same time, also within the Catholic Church, you would have preaching monks from different preaching orders within the church, who would also had a need for small Bibles that they could bring with them, because up until this time, because the Bibles have become so big, because all the illustrations, etc., you would rarely find them bound together in one volume. You will find maybe Gospels together, or you will find the Book of Revelation in one volume, or the Book of Psalms, typically. But in this area now, because of the business need, professional workshops were set up to copy. Up until this time, Bibles would only be copied in monasteries by monks, but now you would have commercial writing factories, you could say, where professionals would sit and copy the Bible. And because of development in the technology, with a form of parchment that is extremely thin, it's almost like you can actually see through it. And because of development of a new form of script or typeface, the Gothic, very compact, it was actually possible to make unbelievably small Bibles. Like this one we have illustrated here. Yeah, well, it's impossible for you to see the size of it, but I'm sure you're surprised when I tell you that the size of this is only 12 by 18 centimeters. And the text columns are actually only 93 millimeters times 26 millimeters. So it's such a tiny book. And there are actually smaller than this one in existence also. We have a page from such a Bible, actually two on display at the museum, one in the permanent exhibition and one in the temporary exhibition in connection with this talk. They're a little bit bigger, but still unbelievably small. Can you imagine a man sitting and copying the whole Bible in such a minute writing so minutely? It's really unbelievable. Now, 200 years later, we get what is really one of the biggest evolutions in history, and that is the printing, invented by Johannes Gutenberg. And his first product came on the scene in 1454, or was ready in 1544, came on the scene in 1455. And that was a copy of the Bible in 2 volumes, now known as the Gutenberg Bible. It was he printed in 180 copies of it. And he picked the Bible because he knew that Bibles were sought after, and manuscript Bibles were very expensive. So there was a big market, business market for it. And that proved true because his Bibles were, his 880 copies were sold out right away. What he actually did was he took a Papyrus Bible, just like the one we looked at, that form of organizing the page and he magnified it. But he made it to look like it was a manuscript. So all the letters were printed in black, and then all the illustrations, the initials, the etc. were put on afterwards by an artist in color. It's really unbelievable, impossible for us to understand the magnitude of this project. It was an experiment, you could say, because it hadn't been done before. But the end result is so beautiful. It's still recognized as one of the most beautiful books ever made, the Gutenberg Bible. Actually, at the museum, we have an original page on permanent exhibition. And it's also impossible for us to really understand the importance of this invention. But there is a reason why Gutenberg was chosen as the man of the millennium as we left the second millennium and entered into the third millennium. In fact, what we know as modern science would not exist without the printing technology. So at the museum, we have a separate Gutenberg corner where you can learn much more about it, where we also have a working press that is similar to one that Gutenberg used. Now, as I said, when he printed in black. He wasn't able to print in color that time. But just 2 years later, his apprentice and the guy who financed, who was his business partner, launched the main Psalter. That's the first book in history that's printed in color. And it's also the first book with the name of the printer and the year of the print on it. But this is surely Gutenberg's masterpiece. This is surely he who should have had the honor for this beautiful book that it is, the book of Psalms. But by this time he was bankrupt, and he died just a few years later without ever seeing the full consequences of his invention. Now, if you compare the early printed books to the manuscript books, you would think, was this really a progress? Like this one here, European Bible was manuscript Bible that was made actually, as we see, 20 years or more after the Gutenberg Bible was printed. So beautiful. But the fact is that not only was this enormously expensive, but less than 10% of manuscript books were actually illustrated. Less than 10%. But by the year 1550, 50% of all books, all printed books, were illustrated. So yes, it was progress. At the museum in the exhibition, we have something that is very interesting. It's this very modest title page. It's actually from a Bible that we have at the permanent exhibition at the museum from 1487. That is 5 years before Columbus came to America. And this Bible is the first Bible in quarto size with a title page. The first Bible with a title page at all came 2 years before. But imagine, all the way up until this time, books didn't have any title page. So the title page is a relatively new invention in the history of the book. And when you realize that the cost of making a book before, in the old days, the paper or the leather represented 30-40% of the cost of the book, you understand that a page like this, just one word, Biblia, waste of space. Really. Just within 20 years, title pages had developed. Like this is from the famous book of Revelation, illustrated by Albrecht Dürer, published in 1498. This is the title page here. Big step forward. And these are his woodcut illustrations that the Dürer made. So can you believe it? It's 1498 and we have so detailed illustrations already in this book of example, the book of Revelation. If we stick to Germany, we find one of the most important books in history there, the Luther Bible. The Luther Bible was translated by Martin Luther and his close associates. He translated the New Testament himself in only 10 weeks. From the first translation in history from the original Greek to a modern language, and he did it in a beautiful way. He was actually a genius with languages, Martin Luther. So he shaped and united the German language. And it became the starting point for all translations in the Protestant countries. And it's so important that it's on the UNESCO list. But the Luther and the people around him did more, and so they actually transformed the whole publishing industry in Germany, which was the largest printing industry in all of Europe. And it actually transformed the whole industry from making the books from a few people to making a mass market books, and from books primarily in Latin to books in languages that people could read, and from big and expensive to small and cheap books, almost like a paper, as we know paperbacks today. And it's also the first example of branding. They branded Luther's name, the brand of the place of printing, Wittenberg, and developed in this way also the title page format even further. If you move now to France, and a famous Bible printer called Robert Estienne in French, or in Latin, Stephanus, we come to another important step in usability, at least, of the Bible, and that is his Latin Bible from 1555, which we have an original of on exhibition at the museum. It's the first Bible in the world where we see the verse numbering, as we know it today, integrated into the text. So we can imagine what it would have been like for us today to read and study and look up in the Bible if we didn't have verse numbering. As Robert Estienne, he developed this because he made a concordance, and for being able to find the specific location of a certain word, you needed something specific to point to more than just a chapter numbering. If you take just a quick sidestep into the Nordic countries, we have milestones here also that in the printing industry that are directly linked to the Bible. For instance, the first printed book in the Icelandic language was the New Testament. The first major printed work in the Nordic countries, which I have on permanent exhibition at the museum, was the Swedish Vasa Bible, King Vasa Bible of 1541. And also the first major work printed in Denmark, Norway, as we also have an exhibition, the Bible of Christian III. And also the first major work printed in Iceland, I think, was also the Bible. So that was just a quick step up north before we go further south again. But this time not to Germany or to France, but to England. And England, the growth of England as a world power, because the Bible was carried along with that in English. The illustration that we see here is from a so-called Bishop's Bible from 1568 or something like that. And the one we see here is Queen Elizabeth I. And as we know, it was under her rule that England became a world power. And the English Bibles developed further into culminating into the King James Bible of 1611, which, as I said earlier, is the world's most printed book, actually. We have an original page of this one at the museum as well. As I said, that the Bible was taking along as the English Empire grew all over the world. And it even ended up in North America. Actually, the first printed book in North America was a biblical book. It was a copy of the book of Psalms, made for singing, which was printed in 1640, long before the United States came on the scene. was still an English British colony. And we have a facsimile edition of that one at the museum. We don't like the original, but that is not very easy. There are very, very few copies of these in the world. Actually, the last one that was sold was in New York in 2013, and it sold for something like $14 million. So it's the most expensive printed book ever sold at an auction. Another very sought after book is the Eliot Indian Bible from 1663. We have an original page of this one at the museum. It's the first Bible translation made in America. And it's the first so-called missionary translation. It's the first translation into a non-European language. So when you think about the development of the book, it's interesting to see also this from the United States, knowing the importance that the North American United States have had in the printing industry since this time. Because if you look closer at these books like this one from 1663, you see at the time it was quite rudimentary printing, because it was a little bit, it was a colony far away where didn't have much advanced equipment to make these things. And now lastly come to the last revolution we mentioned, and that's the digital revolution. It comprises several areas. We have the research area, where actually the first computer-made concordance was of the Bible, the Revised Standard Version, 1957. But then when we move from the mainframe area into the desktop machine area, we get more and more different software programs, Bible software programs. And the world's largest today is the Logos, and that Logos started out in 1991. In the internet area, we also have had more and more different software and apps coming onto the scene, which is amplified now also by the U version, for instance, which we'll be looking at in a moment. The first, stop to reflect upon the tablet. The iPad actually only came 10 years ago, in 2010. It's a little bit strange to think about that today, isn't it? The PDF format, which is the format of many electronic books and Bibles today, came on the scene in 1993. As I said, the YouVersion is an example of a Bible app. It's most popular in the world, actually. Has more than 2,000 translations, 1,500 languages almost, and it's been downloaded now close to 500 million at times. So it makes God's word available all over the world to all kinds of people and most languages, actually. You know, one of the most important sources for archaeologists is garbage dumps. That's where we found a lot of the New Testament papyrus manuscripts, for instance, garbage dumps. Now think about the tablet. If we still had, I mean, theoretically, Moses, the stone tablets could have been preserved until today, right? And it could actually have been also if they're written on leather, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they found that they were 2,000 years old. But think about the tablets we are using today, the e-tablet. How much information will that give away in, let's say, 350 years? Somebody finds it in garbage dump. This gives a little bit time for reflection, doesn't it, to think about that? So we have now been through 5 revolutionary inventions in communication that has to do with the book and with the Bible. And we've seen that, like this author says, that the Bible is the locomotive that pulls the technological development of the book always on and on, to the extent where we are today, and we can also maybe expect even further developments in the future. But it's like the Bible itself says, that the Word of God endures forever, and that it will do. The exhibition that we have at the museum covers all the aspects, the points that we've been through now, from the stone tablet to the e-tablet. These examples of scroll, codex, the Gutenberg Bible, etc. at the museum. So if you have a chance at all to come to Oslo and to see it, you should certainly do so. As I said initially, the museum is run by volunteers only and privately funded only. So please support us. You can do so by visiting the museum. You can do so by donating. You can do so by becoming a friend of the museum. And you can do so by purchasing from the web shop. The web shop will be up and running in September, but we right now we have the physical shop at the museum, which you can, of course, visit if you are at the museum. So I would like to thank you so much for your patience with me, and I hope that you will also return for our next webinar. Thank you so much.